All right, let's take two, because I think me insinuating, which I did not intend to do, but it came out sounded that way, that you were stupid is probably not a good way to start a video. All right, welcome to Viking Preparedness. I am PJ. Hey, man, it's windy here. I was talking to a guy at Ruckus and about guns and children in the home. And I think I was at the end of my tether and I was a little bit harsh with him. So if you're watching, I don't even know if you're a Viking or not. I apologize. Refer to the last video. But he said I should do a video on it, and I agree. I want to give credit where credit's due. As a young adult, as a slightly older than young adult, I was informed on the issue by Masad Ayub, who wrote a great pamphlet called Gun-Proofing Your Children. And the concept is you cannot child-proof your guns. You cannot store your guns in a way that your child cannot get at it and have it be of any use to you at all. They're going to figure it out. They're smart. They're children. They're smart. They're agile. They'll get it. Or even if you don't have any firearms in your home, when your son or perhaps daughter goes to Bobby's house for the afternoon and Bobby says, "You want to see my dad's gun?" They're going to say yes. And so you need to gun-proof your children. Now, I was raised partially in a house in Laos. People have started calling it Lao, I've noticed. A small landlocked country in Southeast Asia. I lived there as a child in the late 1960s. And if you know anything about that time, the CIA was conducting a secret war in Laos. And that was back when the CIA took its family to combat. I was family. In my house, there were 2 submachine guns and 2 handguns fully loaded, hanging on the wall when my father was home. There was a Swedish K and an M3 grease gun. There was a Browning high power and a 38 special hanging on the wall. And when I was 6, I was taught how to load fire and be safe with all of those firearms when I was 6 years old. So sometimes when I start talks for different people, I say when I was 6 years old, the CIA trained me to kill. Because that's not wrong. That's not a lie. My dad was in CIA. He trained me how to do it. But, so I grew up in a house with loaded guns. The whole time I was growing up, there were loaded guns in my house. Now, once we moved back to the States, there were no machine guns. Those were issued, and you got to turn issued things back in. But there were loaded rifles and shotguns and handguns in my home as a child and as a teenager. And let me tell you something. I was not a goody-goody. I think I was a normal teenager. I got in trouble. I did stupid things at times, yada, yada. Didn't go to jail or anything. But, I wasn't a perfect kid. And I never once, not once, touched those firearms. And I knew exactly where all of them were. And they were unlocked, unsecured, and loaded. And I never once touched one without my father's permission and direct supervision. Neither did my brother, who's very different from me. We raised our kids exactly the same. I raised 3 children. They're now raising their own children. I loaded guns all over the house. They never touched them. Not going to do it. Why? Discipline, proper training, actually talking to your children. It starts with never having to say 1, 2, I mean it, Johnny, 3. You do not have a disciplined child. You are not a good parent if you're doing that with your kids. There, I said it. You're not in control. Your children, and I'm not perfect. Example, my wife would say to me with our son, "Why do I have to tell him things 2 and 3 times and you tell him once?" And he does it. I'm like, because he knows what happens if I have to tell him a second time. Therefore, I never have to tell him a second time. But see, we weren't perfect. But you have to have discipline in your household. Discipline is important. If you tell your kids, "Stop," when they're running, they have to stop. Or if you have your child code, you know, like, hey, that used to be mine, and then my kid's name, and they would stop and look at me. What if they're running and there's a bear coming that they can't see from their blind spot? Or what if they're running and there's a car coming and they're going to run into it, or whatever? Your children have to be under control, and they have to listen. And I say all the time, if you see a bratty 6-year-old, those parents are in trouble in 6 years when that kid turns 12. And then in 4 more years, when they turn 16, they're driving. Got to get control of your kids. So, our rule, Eddie Eagle, NRA used to have a thing, they may still for all I know, called Eddie Eagle. And they had little coloring books and little kids like story books about gun safety. And my wife taught it, and then when she became an NRA instructor, we taught that, we added that to our kids' instruction. And their mantra was, if you see a gun, a gun, a firearm, stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. And you just drill your kids into that. I did with my kids what my dad did with me. Never touch this gun without me being there and my permission. Excuse me, my nose is just, it was clear this morning when I woke up. Never touch a gun without my permission. But whenever I said, or my children said to me, I said to my dad, or my children said to me, hey, can I see the 30-06? Can I see the AR? Can I see the pistol? I'd be like, yep. We would go get it. I would go over the safety rules. You know, don't ever point this at anything. Always make sure the gun is unloaded, because you can never assume that it's not. Show them how to do all that. Hold it in a safe manner. Let them handle it. Make gentle but firm corrections if they did something like this with a pistol. You know, pointed it and you do that a couple of times and they get it. Kids are smart. And they can handle the guns. There was no mystery in the firearms. It was just a dangerous thing. It's like the chainsaw. Don't go fire up the chainsaw if I'm not around. Now, truth be told, we didn't have chainsaws till my kids were almost out of the house. I didn't learn how to use them till then. Some would say I still don't know how. But that was the thing. Remove the mystery from it. You know, just let them see it whenever they want. Make it kind of like a class. It's actually a little bit boring. It's a little bit, yeah, Dad, you told me this. And then it just becomes a thing they don't want to play with. As far as a kid coming over our house, we tried really hard never to leave people unsupervised in our house. But hey, stuff happens, right? What if that kid had said, hey, does your dad have any guns? Can I see them? There's no way my kids would have let them. They would have let them. And by the time they got to high school, I told them, if a teacher ever asked you, which they never did, do you have firearms in the home? I told them, and they knew, tell the teacher, you need to ask my parents that, and then come home and tell me that as soon as you see me, that they asked you that. Because then I go off. But that never happened. But gang, it's that simple. Now, that doesn't work, what I just told you, does not work for toddlers. You know, when they start walking around like this, up until probably, you have to judge your children, but 5 or 6 years old. Up till 5 or 6 years old, the firearms, in my opinion, they weren't in my house growing up. They were in my house raising my children. They have to be inaccessible to the children, for the most part. When Glock first came out, I had a medic on my team, and his wife had a Glock 17. It was the only Glock out, Glock 9mm, and she didn't shoot it properly. And if you limp wrist the Glock, meaning you're not putting enough pressure behind it to let the slide recoil, it'll jam. And it was doing that to her because she was a petite woman and she wasn't holding it hard enough. And they wanted to get rid of it. And I kind of wanted the firearm, and my wife at the time had a PPKS, which is the James Bond gun. It's a little 380. And we were looking to upgrade to a 9mm, and he wanted to trade straight across. And I wanted to, and so we took the gun and we took it to the range and we shot it. But what got me on it was because I do not believe in Israeli carry. When I have a gun, it's loaded. I'm not gonna pull it out, cock it, and then shoot it. There's a round in the chamber, and there really is no safety on a Glock. You pull that trigger and it goes bang. And a little kid can grab that gun, even if they can't hold it out right, and they can manipulate that trigger, maybe with their thumbs while they're looking at it, right? And so we decided we cannot have a Glock. And so I didn't get a Glock till later. We had a 357 Magnum. It was very heavy, and it had a pretty stout trigger pull to make it go bang. And we used to keep that on top of the refrigerator. And yes, a child could climb up on the counter, pull the drawers out, climb up on the counter, and reach up there and get it. The chance at the age before they understood things that they could actually pull the trigger, very, very small. And number two, guess what we didn't allow our kids to do? Climb up on the counter, right? So that was a risk we took, if you will, but we didn't get the Glock because of that, because we would keep it on the fridge. We only had that one gun for a while, and then when we went to bed it would be on the nightstand, and sometimes you get up in the morning, you go do things, that's still sitting on the nightstand, right? So we didn't want a kid to get it. And then we got a shotgun, and I would store the pump shotgun loaded in the magazine, nothing in the chamber, and it was loaded, cocked on an empty chamber, and on safe. And if you understand shotguns, you know that to make that gun then fire, you have to do a whole bunch of things. You have to depress a button to release the slide, cock the slide correctly, and then you have to take it off safe, and then you have to pull the trigger. That's a whole lot of actions for a toddler to do. Probably not going to happen, and we would do that. You do you, boo. But number one is discipline your child. Number two is educate your child. Number three is remove the mystery from it. I've told this story before, I think, to the Jarls and Berserkers. I was working in cubicle land. Most of the people I was working with were retired military officers. And I went to a different part of the office that I never went to. And typical government workers were all sitting around like one cubicle just BSing, talking about stuff. And this woman, retired lieutenant colonel, maybe a nurse, was adamant. She was a single mom. And she's like, no one should have unsecured firearms in their home. Or no one should have firearms in their home if they have kids. That's what she said. And most of the guys were fairly conservative and were hunters. And I'm me. I just speak. And I'm like, what? And she goes, well, she didn't want to feel stupid. She goes, well, I mean, they could be locked up separate from the ammunition, which is also locked up. And I said, huh. I looked at my watch, and it was after 3 in the afternoon. And I said, well, I guarantee you right now that my 14-year-old daughter is within arm's reach of a loaded Glock. And she's like appalled. What? And back then, my daughter was wrestling. And so I knew she weighed 103 pounds. And I said, well, check it out. My wife is at a wives thing. I'm here at work. She's home alone. She's this tall and weighs 103 pounds. What is she going to do if somebody kicks in my door? Which, oh, by the way, in the country, houses are burgled between like 1 and 3 all the time. That's like the common time to do it because everybody's out running errands. I said, what's she going to do against somebody when she's that small? I said, but I've trained her how to shoot a Glock. I've put videos of her shooting up here before. And she can defend herself with that. And I bought all 3 of my kids a Glock, and I gave it to the 2 oldest ones when they turned 21. I gave it to her when she was 14 because she was home alone. We would come home from an event, let's say we were out, it's dark, come in the house. We had a security protocol with the dogs, but I'd be like, holler my daughter's name because I don't see her. And I'd hear her in the bathroom taking a bath. You hear the water splashing. And I said, do you have the Glock with you? And she knew what I was going to say. And you could hear it go clunk, clunk on the side of the bed. She would just reach over there and clunk, on the side of the tub. She'd go clunk, clunk to let me know that she had it. That's my theory on gun safety. If your theory is lock them up and keep them separate from the ammunition, then by all means do what you do. I will tell you that most especially if you have undisciplined or questionably disciplined children, if they don't listen to you and everything else you tell them to do, that might be a good move for you. I think the correct action is teach them how to use them, remove the curiosity, and back to it. Discipline your kids. All right. I am fascinated in your comments. I will see you out there.